Granny is just like God. She fixes everything. My mother is the handywoman of our family. Her father, my grandfather, was quite handy. In fact, he was a bricklayer by trade, and so he worked with his hands all the time. Around the house, when he was fixing things, as a little girl, my mom would watch and learn from everything that he was doing. She was the apprentice who passed all the tools when he needed them. And so when I was growing up, while my dad was the academic of the family, a little bit like a walking encyclopedia, or one would probably say today like a walking Alexa, my mom was the handywoman of the house. And I have memories of her laying down tiles on the kitchen floor, taking the washing machine apart to replace gaskets and fan belts, completely reupholstering the lounge and the dining room furniture, fixing the flushing mechanism in the toilet if it wasn't working, along with other plumbing work, replacing blown fuses, changing electrical plugs, and the list could go on and on. Whatever handyman skills I may have, I have learned them from my mom. Even now into her 70s, her reputation still holds strong, even though back pain may hinder her ability to do some of the things that she would have done when she was younger. My mom's grandson, my nephew Christian, has come to believe that my mom can fix anything. A year ago or so, one of his toys broke. And so my brother said to him, "Don't worry, we'll store it in the cupboard. When Granny comes to visit again, she will help to fix it for you." To which he replied, "Granny is like God. She can fix anything." It reminds me of that saying which goes something like this: God could not be everywhere, so he created mothers. After quoting this statement, Sabrina Premige writes the following: "I could not agree more. Moms are truly one of a kind. They have arms that were made for holding, for cradling, for loving. In these past 24 years," she says, "my mom has used those arms to tuck me in every night, to rub my injured back, to wax my legs for the first time, to make her infamous tacos when my friends came over, to comfort me after a bad date, to hold my hand before crossing security at the airport, to squeeze me tight when I needed TLC, to love me unconditionally. And though I have grown over these years, sadly not by much," she says, "there was always more than enough space to fit in my mom's arms. She's like a magician," she concludes. Perhaps it's worth noting that not all people experience their mothers in the same positive way that Sabrina Premige experienced her mother. On Mother's Day, while it is certainly an opportunity to highlight all the best qualities that can be found in a mother, and to celebrate all that our mothers have done for us in the past and all they do for us in the present, there is a danger of eulogizing mothers too much, because ultimately all mothers have their own struggles and difficulties. All mothers have their strengths as well as their weaknesses and failings. And if we eulogize mothers too much, it can put an enormous amount of pressure on women to feel that now they have to live up to some kind of unattainable ideal. It can also potentially alienate those whose relationships with their mothers have not always been wholesome or life-affirming. But it is Mother's Day, and so not completely inappropriate for us to celebrate some of the wonderful qualities that mothers bring into the world. And in the context of Sunday worship, it is perhaps also not inappropriate for us to consider how motherhood as a whole does have the potential for revealing something of the character and the nature of God. Within Christianity, we are not accustomed to speaking of God using feminine language. Most Christian talk of God has been to refer to God almost exclusively in masculine language. And the result is that many Christians around the world live with an underlying view that God is actually a man, albeit a very big, cosmic man. But the opening chapter of the book of Genesis reminds us that both men and women were made in the image of God. And if this is the case, then it is ultimately not true to say that God is a male or masculine. If God is infinite, then everything we say about God using finite human language needs to be regarded as provisional and metaphorical. Under certain circumstances, it is therefore possible to say that God, the great mystery of life, is like a man or like a father. But if God is truly infinite, and if women too are made in God's image, then it should be equally possible to say that under certain circumstances God could be described also like a woman and like a mother. And the truth is that in the Bible there are a number of passages where God is indeed described using feminine imagery. And the first place that this is done is again in Genesis chapter 1, where God is described almost as though God is like a mother bird, brooding over her eggs, waiting for them to crack open and for life to come bursting forth. The first few verses of Genesis read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering or brooding over the waters." The word that is translated as hovering is the Hebrew word rochaf. It is a word that can mean to flutter, to hover, to brood. In Deuteronomy 32 verse 11, the same Hebrew word is used to describe God in the imagery of an eagle. It says God is like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers or broods over its young. And so in both Genesis 1 and Deuteronomy 32, God is portrayed like a motherly bird brooding. In Genesis 1, brooding over the act of creation, waiting for life to come forth. And in Deuteronomy, brooding protectively over her chicks. This image is used again in Psalm 91 in the first 4 verses, where the psalmist speaks of hiding under the shadow of the Almighty. And then in verse 4, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." In the book of Job, God is again pictured as a woman who gives birth to creation. In Job 10 verse 18, God is described as bringing Job forth from the womb, as though God himself, or perhaps maybe one could say God herself, has given birth to Job. And later on in chapter 38 verse 29, when the voice of God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, the divine voice asks, "From whose womb does ice come forth? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens?" What these verses do is remind us that in every act of birthing, women are participating in the divine act of creation, and that all of creation is this motherly God's beloved offspring and child. From an ecological perspective, if creation is seen as the act of birthing from the womb of God and as an act of motherly love from God, then we as human beings should show the same respect for creation as we would to any child, as an object of a mother's love and care. The image of God as mother is used again further on in Isaiah in chapter 49. The passage was written during the exile in Babylon, after the Babylonian Empire had invaded the kingdom of Judah and destroyed the city of Jerusalem, taking many of the people of Judah into exile in Babylon, there in exile, to a people who had lost everything and who were now living in a strange and a foreign land. A prophet speaks of God's ongoing love and care for his people. despite appearances that it seemed that God had abandoned them. God is described as a mother who can never abandon or forget her children. But Zion said, "The Lord has forsaken me, the Lord has forgotten me." Can a woman forget her nursing child, or lack compassion for the son of her womb? Even if she could forget, I will not forget you. Behold, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands. The passage speaks of God's motherly love for her child, whom she can never forget or abandon. And then our last passage for today, in Luke 15, Jesus describes God in feminine terms, as he describes God as a woman, perhaps even a mother, searching high and low for her lost coin. She sweeps the house, turns it upside down, looking for this valuable coin that is lost. It's an image that is meant to remind us that all lost and wayward human beings and indeed there are many of them, that all wayward human beings in the world are like a valuable coin to God. And God is like a diligent woman, caring for and managing her home and her household, searching out for that which is lost. It's quite an unusual image of God. Normally we are used to hearing God being described in the imagery of a great king, sometimes as a warrior. But in this parable, Jesus uses the down-to-earth, homely image of God as a woman, bustling around her home, making sure that everything is in order. God, the home executive. On this Mother's Day, as we celebrate the gift of God, the gift of mothers, may we also know the motherly love of God, who has given birth to us in love, who has promised never to forsake or abandon us in our moments of exile, and who comes searching for her valuable lost treasure when we find ourselves lost and we do not know our true worth. May God bless you. Amen.